Hello everyone, welcome back to Buried Files. Tonight we bring you 6 deeply disturbing true cemetery horror stories that will make you question what really happens in the places where we lay our loved ones to rest. These are not fictional tales, but real encounters shared by security guards, groundskeepers, photographers, and ordinary people who experience something terrifying in graveyards across the country. Each story has been meticulously documented through police reports, witness accounts, and first-hand testimonies from individuals who lived through these harrowing experiences. Cemeteries are more than just resting places for the dead. They are locations where the boundaries between our world and something beyond become dangerously thin, where human evil finds cover in the darkness, and where mysteries unfold that defy rational explanation. If you enjoy authentic horror content rooted in verified accounts that will keep you awake at night, subscribe to Buried Files and hit the notification bell so you never miss our latest investigations into the darkest corners of reality. After you listen to these chilling accounts, we want to hear from you in the comments below about your own encounters with the unexplained or any cemetery experiences that left you shaken. Now settle in as we explore what lurks among the tombstones when the sun goes down and the gates close behind you. I need to tell someone about what happened at Glenwood Memorial Cemetery. It has been 3 years since I quit that job, and I still have nightmares about it. The police told me not to talk about the case while it was active, but the trial ended 6 months ago. And honestly, keeping this inside has been eating me alive. So here we are. My name is Jalen, and I worked night security at one of the oldest cemeteries in Pennsylvania. And what I discovered there will haunt me for the rest of my life. When I first applied for the job, I thought it would be easy money. You know the deal. Overnight security work pays well because most people are too creeped out to work in a cemetery after dark. But I have never been the superstitious type. Ghosts and spirits and all that paranormal nonsense never bothered me. Dead people cannot hurt you. That is what I always told myself. It is the living you have to watch out for. And unfortunately, I learned that lesson the hard way. Glenwood Memorial is massive. We are talking about over 200 acres of burial grounds, with sections dating back to the 1800s. The place has everything you would expect from a historic cemetery. Victorian monuments, elaborate mausoleums, old family crypts covered in ivy, the whole works. Some of the graves in the oldest sections have not had visitors in decades. The headstones are weathered beyond recognition, the names eroded by time and acid rain. It is beautiful in a melancholy sort of way, especially at sunset when the light hits the angel statues just right. But at night, when you are alone with nothing but a flashlight and a radio, the place takes on a different character entirely. My first month on the job was completely uneventful. The routine was simple enough. I would arrive at 10 in the evening, check in with the day supervisor, and then spend the next 8 hours patrolling the grounds in a golf cart. The cemetery had 6 main gates, and part of my job was to make sure they were all locked and secure. Every 2 hours, I would radio into the monitoring service to confirm that everything was fine. Between patrols, I would sit in the security office, a small brick building near the main entrance, and monitor the handful of security cameras we had positioned around the property. Most nights, the biggest excitement was a deer wandering through the headstones or a raccoon knocking over a flower vase. The only real incidents I dealt with were occasional teenagers trying to hop the fence on weekend nights. You know the type. Bored kids looking for a thrill, wanting to explore the creepy cemetery after dark or make out among the tombstones. I would shine my spotlight on them, and they would scatter like roaches. Sometimes I would find empty beer cans or cigarette butts near the more secluded sections, But that was about it. There was also the occasional homeless person seeking shelter in one of the larger mausoleums. But they were always respectful when I asked them to leave. Glenwood was located on the edge of town, surrounded by woods on 3 sides, so it made sense that people passing through would see it as a safe place to rest for the night. Everything changed in my second month. It was a Tuesday night, unseasonably warm for October. I was doing my routine patrol through Section F, which housed burials from the late 1800s. This was one of the most neglected parts of the cemetery. Tucked away in the back corner where the old oak trees created a canopy so thick that sunlight barely penetrated during the day. At night, even with my flashlight, the darkness there felt oppressive. The graves in Section F had not been maintained in years. Many of the plots belonged to families that had died out or moved away, and the cemetery management had basically given up on keeping the area pristine. Weeds grew wild between the headstones, and fallen branches littered the narrow paths. As I drove my golf cart along the main path, something caught my eye. There were fresh flowers on one of the graves. Now, this might not sound strange to you, but I had been patrolling this section for over a month, and I had never once seen flowers here. I stopped the cart and walked over to take a closer look. The grave belonged to someone named Margaret Holloway, died 1893, aged 37 years. The headstone was simple, just a small marble marker that had turned gray with age. But sitting in front of it was a bouquet of white lilies, so fresh that I could still smell them. The stems were wet, like they had just been placed there within the hour. I radioed it in to the monitoring service, and they told me to make a note in the log, but not to worry about it. Families visit graves at all hours, they said. Maybe someone had gotten special permission to enter after hours. But that did not sit right with me. All after-hours visits had to be cleared through the main office, and I would have been notified. Plus, the gates were locked. How did someone get in? I walked the perimeter of Section F looking for any signs of a breach in the fence, but I found nothing. No footprints in the soft earth, no broken branches, nothing. It was like the flowers had materialized out of thin air. Over the next 2 weeks, it kept happening. Every few nights, I would find fresh flowers on Margaret Holloway's grave. Sometimes lilies, sometimes roses, always white. I started varying my patrol times, trying to catch whoever was leaving them, but I never saw anyone. The flowers just appeared. I even set up one of our portable cameras near the grave. But when I reviewed the footage, there was nothing. Just hours of empty darkness. And then suddenly, flowers. No person, no movement, just flowers. I became obsessed with it. During my shifts, I would spend more and more time in Section F, watching that grave. I started bringing my own flashlight, a heavy-duty one that could illuminate the entire area. I would sit in the ballast, golf cart 30 yards away with the lights off, just waiting. My co-worker during the day shift, a guy named Marcus, thought I was losing it. He told me I was spending too much time alone in the dark, that the isolation was getting to me. But I knew something was wrong. This was not some grieving relative paying respects. This was something else. Then I found the footprints. It had rained the night before, and the ground in Section F was soft and muddy. During my 3 a.m. patrol, I swept my flashlight across Margaret Holloway's grave and saw them. Fresh boot prints in the mud, leading from the grave toward the maintenance shed. My heart started racing. The maintenance shed was supposed to be locked. Only the groundskeepers had keys, and they left every day at 5. I followed the prints, my hand on the radio, ready to call for backup. The prints led right up to the shed door, The padlock was still in place, but when I looked closer, I could see fresh scratches around the keyhole. Someone had been picking the lock. I did not open the shed that night. I radioed the monitoring service immediately and told them I had evidence of a break-in. They contacted the local police, and 2 officers arrived about 20 minutes later. We opened the shed together, and at first, it looked completely normal. Tools, lawn equipment, bags of fertilizer, nothing out of place. But then one of the officers found something tucked behind a stack of clay pots in the back corner. It was a sleeping bag, some canned food, and a notebook. Someone had been living in the shed. The police took the notebook as evidence, but before they did, I got a glimpse of what was inside. Pages and pages of handwritten notes, all about Margaret Holloway. Birth records, death records, newspaper clippings about her family. Whoever had been leaving the flowers had been researching her, obsessing over her. The police told me to be extra vigilant and to call immediately if I saw anything suspicious. They set up additional patrols in the area and promised to increase their presence. For a few nights, everything was quiet. No more flowers, no more footprints. I thought maybe whoever it was had gotten scared off. But then it happened, the night that changed everything. It was a Friday, just after 2 in the morning. I was doing my patrol through Section F when I saw a figure standing near Margaret Holloway's grave. My blood went cold. I grabbed my radio and whispered that I had a visual on a trespasser. Then I turned on the spotlight mounted on my golf cart and aimed it directly at the figure. For a split second, I saw a man, maybe in his 30s, wearing dark clothes and a backpack. He looked directly at me, and I will never forget his eyes. They were not surprised or scared. They were angry. He ran, not toward the fence, but deeper into the cemetery, toward the older sections where the terrain got rough. I shouted for him to stop, but he did not even slow down. I jumped out of the golf cart and ran after him, following the beam of my flashlight. He was fast, weaving between headstones and monuments like he knew the layout by heart. I called his position in over the radio as I chased him, my lungs burning. Then I heard other voices, more than one person. I stopped dead in my tracks, my flashlight sweeping the darkness. That was when I saw them. 2 more figures, both carrying shovels, standing near a grave in Section C. I did not chase them. I did not even shout. I turned around and ran back to my golf cart as fast as I could, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would explode. But when I got there, both tires on the golf cart had been slashed. Someone had been waiting for me. I fumbled for my radio, my hands shaking, and screamed for police assistance. Then I ran toward the main office building, which was the only structure with a secure door. Behind me, I could hear footsteps. Someone was following me. I made it to the office and locked myself inside, gasping for breath. Through the window, I could see flashlights moving in the distance, multiple people, all converging on different areas of the cemetery. This was not some lone person leaving flowers. This was organized. I stayed on the radio with the dispatcher, giving them updates on what I was seeing, and within 10 minutes, the place was swarming with police. They found 3 people trying to escape through the back fence. All 3 were arrested on the spot. But the real horror came when the police started investigating what they had been doing. In Section C, they found a half-dug grave. The casket had been partially exhumed, and next to it was an empty body bag. Near the fence, police found surgical tools, a cooler packed with ice, and a hospital identification badge that did not belong to any of the suspects. The police detectives arrived at dawn, And that was when they told me what I had stumbled into. This was not some weird grave robbing scheme. It was an organ trafficking ring. They had been targeting recently buried bodies, ones that had been interred within 24 to 48 hours. The bodies were fresh enough that certain organs could still be harvested and sold on the black market. The lead detective explained that this kind of operation was rare, but not unheard of. Usually, it involves someone on the inside, someone with access to burial records and schedules. That was when they showed me surveillance footage from the cemetery office. Footage I had never seen because I did not have access to the administrative security system. It showed a woman I had never met, someone who worked in the main office during the day, printing out burial schedules and passing them to a man in the parking lot. Over the next few weeks, the investigation unfolded like a nightmare. 5 people were arrested in total, including the office worker and a morgue employee from a nearby hospital who had been feeding them information about fresh deaths. They had been operating for at least 6 months, maybe longer. The police exhumed 14 graves that showed signs of tampering. 14 families had to be told that their loved ones had been violated after death. I had to give statements, testify before a grand jury, sit through depositions. It was hell. I quit 3 months later. Even after they caught everyone involved, even after the cemetery installed new security measures and hired 2 additional night guards, I could not do it anymore. Every time I walked through those gates, I felt sick. I kept thinking about those families, about Margaret Holloway, and whoever had been obsessing over her grave. The police eventually figured out that the man leaving flowers was not part of the trafficking ring at all. He was just some disturbed individual with a fixation on a woman who had been dead for over a century. They never caught him. He disappeared after that night and never came back. I have a new job now, working security at a shopping mall. It is boring and the pay is worse, but at least I sleep at night. Well, most nights. I still have dreams about Glenwood Memorial, about running through the dark with footsteps behind me, about seeing those shovels and that empty body bag. But the worst dreams are the ones where I am back in Section F, standing in front of Margaret Holloway's grave, and I see fresh flowers, white lilies. And I know someone is watching me from the darkness. The trial ended 6 months ago. 4 of the 5 were convicted and sentenced to prison terms ranging from 8 to 15 years. But the 5th one, the man who had been coordinating everything, the one with the hospital connections, he posted bail and disappeared before his trial date. The police have a warrant out for him, but as far as I know, he has not been found. Sometimes I wonder if he's still out there, setting up another operation in another cemetery in another town. I wonder if some other unsuspecting security guard will stumble onto what he is doing, and if they will be as lucky as I was to get out alive. People always ask me if I believe in ghosts now, after working in a cemetery for all those months. And I tell them the same thing every time. I do not believe in ghosts. I never did. Because the dead cannot hurt you. It is the living you have to watch out for. The living and their greed and their willingness to desecrate the dead for profit. That is the real horror. Not some spirit wandering between headstones, but the fact that human beings are capable of such monstrous acts, and that is scarier than any ghost story you will ever hear. My name is Kaylin, and for 8 years I worked as a groundskeeper at Meadowbrook Cemetery in rural Vermont. Now, before you roll your eyes and think this is going to be some typical ghost story, let me be clear about something. I have never been the type of person who believes in the paranormal. I grew up in a practical household where superstition was considered nonsense, and ghost stories were just entertainment for children. I studied horticulture in college, spent my entire adult life working with soil and plants and the natural world. I am a woman of science, or at least I was, because what I experienced at Meadowbrook changed everything I thought I knew about death and what comes after. And if you had told me 10 years ago that I would be sitting here recounting a genuine ghost encounter, I would have laughed in your face. Meadowbrook is not a large cemetery by any means. It sits on about 15 acres of rolling hills overlooking a valley, surrounded by farmland and forest. The place was established in 1882, back when the area was primarily agricultural. Most of the people buried there are locals. Farming families, small business owners, teachers, the kind of folks who spent their entire lives in one small town and never left. It is a beautiful cemetery, honestly. Massive oak trees that must be over 100 years old provide shade in the summer. There are wrought iron gates at the entrance that squeak when you open them. Stone pathways wind between the plots, and in the spring, wild violets grow everywhere. It is peaceful, or at least it was. I started working at Meadowbrook when I was 26, fresh out of a bad breakup and looking for a job that would let me work outdoors and avoid people for a while. The cemetery only employed 3 people. There was old Harold, the caretaker who had been there for 30 years and lived in a small house on the property. There was Jenna, another groundskeeper who worked part-time and mostly handled the administrative stuff like coordinating burials and maintaining records. And then there was me. My job was simple: mow the grass, trim around the headstones, plant seasonal flowers, clear away dead arrangements, keep the place looking dignified. It was exactly the kind of quiet, solitary work I needed at that point in my life. The first year passed without incident. I learned the layout of the cemetery, got to know which families still visited regularly and which graves had been abandoned by time. There was one section in particular that everyone in town knew about. It was located on the eastern edge of the property, beneath a cluster of old maple trees. The section contained a family plot for the Moreaus, a name that carried weight in local history. In 1952, there was a house fire that killed Catherine Moreau and her 2 young daughters, Elizabeth and Marie. The girls were 7 and 5 years old. The father, Thomas Moreau, survived because he was away on a business trip when it happened. The tragedy became part of local folklore. People said Thomas never recovered from the guilt of not being there to save his family. According to the stories passed down through generations, he visited their graves every single morning for 23 years, always bringing a thermos of coffee with him. He would sit on a small bench he had installed near the plot and talk to his wife and daughters as if they were still alive. When Thomas died in 1975, he was buried with them. The whole town turned out for his funeral. Even now, almost 50 years later, people still left flowers on the Moreau graves, especially around the anniversary of the fire. I had been working at Meadowbrook for about 14 months when I saw him for the first time. It was early October, one of those crisp autumn mornings when the air smells like wood smoke and dying leaves. I arrived at the cemetery around 7 in the morning, which was my usual time. The sun was just coming up, casting long shadows across the headstones. I parked my truck near the maintenance shed and started unloading my equipment. That was when I noticed someone standing at the Moreau family plot. He was an elderly man, maybe in his 70s, wearing brown slacks and a tan cardigan. He stood perfectly still, facing the headstones with his head bowed slightly. In his right hand, he held a coffee mug. I could see steam rising from it in the cool morning air. My first thought was that he was a relative, maybe a nephew or cousin of Thomas Moreau. People came to visit those graves all the time. I waved in his direction, just a friendly acknowledgement. But he did not respond. He did not even turn his head. He just stood there, completely motionless, except for the steam rising from his coffee. I went about my work, figuring he wanted privacy. I started mowing the western section of the cemetery, which was a good distance away from the Moreau plot. The mower was loud, and it took me about 30 minutes to finish that area. When I was done, I looked back toward the maple trees where the man had been standing. He was gone. I thought nothing of it at first. He had probably paid his respects and left. But then I walked over to that section to trim around the Moreau headstones, and something struck me as odd. The grass was covered in morning dew. My footprints were clearly visible where I had walked, but there were no other footprints, not a single one, not leading to the plot, not leading away from it, just mine. I stood there for a moment, staring at the ground, trying to make sense of it. Maybe he had walked on the stone pathway? But the pathway was at least 10 feet away, and I had clearly seen him standing right in front of the graves, on the grass. I checked the parking area. My truck was the only vehicle there. The cemetery gates were still locked from the night before. I had unlocked them myself when I arrived. A cold feeling settled in my stomach, but I pushed it away. There had to be a rational explanation. Maybe I had been mistaken about where he was standing. Maybe the dew had evaporated where he walked. I was grasping at straws, and I knew it. I mentioned it to Janae later that week when we were both working. I described the man, the brown slacks, the cardigan, the coffee mug. Janae stopped what she was doing and looked at me with an expression I could not quite read. It was somewhere between amusement and something else. Concern, maybe. She asked me if the man had acknowledged me, and I told her no. She asked if I had heard him arrive or leave, and I said no. Then she smiled in this sad sort of way and said, "That is Thomas. You saw Thomas." I thought she was joking at first. Thomas Moreau had been dead for 50 years. But Janae was completely serious. She explained that she had worked at Meadowbrook for 12 years, and during that time, she had seen Thomas Moreau at least 20 times. Old Harold had seen him too, dozens of times over his 3 decades of working there. So had several visitors over the years. It was always the same. Early morning, always autumn, always standing at the graves with a coffee mug. He never spoke, never acknowledged anyone, just stood there for a minute or two, and then disappeared. Janae said it so matter-of-factly, like she was describing the weather. I did not believe her. I told her there had to be another explanation, that maybe it was someone who just resembled Thomas, someone who came to visit at odd hours. But Janae insisted. She took me into the administration office and showed me something. It was an old newspaper clipping from Thomas Moreau's obituary in 1975. The article included a photograph of him. My hand started shaking when I saw it. It was him, the same face I had seen that morning, the same cardigan, or at least one that looked identical. And in the photograph, he was holding a coffee mug. Over the next 8 years, I saw Thomas Moreau 11 more times. It was always the same circumstances. Early morning, always in autumn, usually in October or early November. Sometimes weeks would go by between sightings, sometimes months, sometimes over a year. There was no pattern to predict when he would appear. But when he did, it was unmistakable. The same outfit, the same posture, the same coffee mug with steam rising from it. And he never lasted more than a few seconds. I would see him, blink or look away for just a moment. And when I looked back, he would be gone. No footprints, no sound, no trace that he had ever been there. I stopped trying to rationalize it after the third time. You can only deny reality for so long before you have to accept what your eyes are telling you. Other people saw him too. Janae saw him twice more during the time we worked together. A woman who came to visit her mother's grave saw him and later asked Harold who the man in the brown cardigan was. She said he had been standing at the Moreau plot and she wanted to offer her condolences. But when she walked over to him, he was gone. A local history professor who was doing research on the cemetery saw him and tried to approach him to ask questions about the Moreau family. Same thing. Disappeared. The most significant encounter happened during my 6th year at Meadowbrook. It was an October morning, cold and gray with fog rolling through the valley. I was raking leaves near the Moreau plot when I saw him appear. But this time, something was different. I was close, maybe only 15 feet away. Close enough to see his face clearly, and instead of just standing there silently, he looked directly at me. Our eyes met and I froze. His expression was heartbreaking, overwhelming sadness mixed with something that looked like peace. He mouthed something at me. I could not hear any words, but I could see his lips moving. It looked like he was saying, "I am sorry." And then he was gone. I stood there for a long time after that, just staring at the spot where he had been. I was not scared, not exactly. It was more like a profound sense of melancholy, like I had witnessed something deeply personal that I was never meant to see. Later that day, I did something I had never done before. I went to the local library and started researching the Moreau family fire. I read every newspaper article, every historical account I could find. The details were brutal. The fire started in the middle of the night, caused by faulty electrical wiring in the walls. Catherine and the girls died from smoke inhalation before the flames even reached their rooms. Thomas had been 3 hours away at a sales conference. By the time he got the phone call and drove home, there was nothing left but ashes. The articles mentioned that Thomas blamed himself for years. He had noticed the lights flickering in the house the week before he left for the conference. But he had not called an electrician because he thought it could wait until he got back. That one decision, that one moment of procrastination, cost him everything. The guilt destroyed him. He never remarried, never moved from the area, never stopped visiting their graves. His obituary mentioned that he died of a heart attack while sitting on the bench at the cemetery. He died where he had spent every morning for 23 years, talking to the family he could not save. After I learned all of this, my perspective shifted. I stopped seeing Thomas as a ghost in the traditional sense. He was not haunting the cemetery. He was not some malevolent spirit trying to scare people. He was just a man who had loved his family so completely, so devastatingly, that death itself could not sever that connection. He was still keeping his morning ritual, still bringing his coffee, still showing up to tell his wife and daughters that he had not forgotten them. I saw him for the last time during my final week at Meadowbrook. I was retiring, moving closer to my daughter who had just had her first baby. It was early October again, and I was doing a final walkthrough of the cemetery before I left for good. When I reached the Moreau plot, he was there, kneeling this time, not standing. His head was bowed like he was praying. And then something impossible happened. 3 small figures appeared next to him. Children, 2 little girls and what looked like a woman. They were translucent, barely visible like reflections on water. But they were there. I saw them. The girls were reaching for Thomas, and the woman was standing behind him with her hand on his shoulder. I blinked, and all 4 of them were gone. I like to think that was his goodbye. That after all those years of mourning, after all that guilt and sadness, he finally found them. That whatever kept him tethered to that cemetery for 5 decades finally released its hold. I never told anyone about seeing the family that day. Not Johnny, not Harold, not my daughter. Some things are too sacred to share, too intimate to put into words. But I carry it with me. That image of a man who loved so deeply that not even death could keep him away. I do not work at Meadowbrook anymore, but I visit sometimes. I bring flowers for the Moreau graves, white carnations usually. And every time I stand there beneath those maple trees, I think about Thomas. I think about how love does not end just because a heart stops beating. I think about how some people make such an impression on the world that pieces of them remain long after they are gone. Not as ghosts or spirits or anything supernatural, but as echoes. Moments caught between what was and what could have been. People ask me if I believe in ghosts now, and I still do not know how to answer that question. What I saw defies everything I thought I knew about the natural world, about death and consciousness and the laws of physics. But I cannot deny what I experienced. I saw Thomas Moreau multiple times. So did other people. And more than that, I felt something in those moments. A presence, an emotion, a truth that exists beyond rational explanation. Maybe that is what ghosts really are. Not monsters or demons or scary things that go bump in the night. Maybe they are just love that refused to die. Maybe they are proof that some bonds are stronger than death itself. I am an old woman now, much older than I was when I started working at Meadowbrook. And when my time comes, I hope someone loves me the way Thomas Moreau loved his family. I hope I make the kind of impression on this world that leaves echoes behind. Because that is what Thomas taught me during those 8 years. Death is not the end of love. It is not even an interruption. It is just another place where love continues, in whatever form it can take. And if that means showing up with a coffee mug on autumn mornings to stand at a grave, then so be it. Love finds a way. It always does. My name is Jaslyn, and I need to tell you about the worst mistake I ever made. When I was 17 years old, I thought I was invincible. I thought nothing could touch me, that consequences were things that happened to other people. I was stupid and reckless and obsessed with documenting everything for social media. My best friend Indiana was the same way. We spent our senior year of high school exploring abandoned buildings, sneaking into places we had no business being, and filming everything for our YouTube channel. We called ourselves urban explorers, but really we were just bored teenagers looking for cheap thrills. And one night, we found something that changed both of us forever. There was this cemetery on the outskirts of our town that everyone talked about, but nobody visited. Rosemont Cemetery. The place had been abandoned since the early 1990s, when the owners went bankrupt and just walked away from it. The gates were chained shut, and a rusted chain-link fence surrounded the entire property. Over the years, it had become overgrown with weeds and saplings. Headstones were toppled over, the old caretaker building had partially collapsed, and the whole place had this aura of decay and neglect. Naturally, it became the subject of local urban legends. People claimed it was cursed, that satanic rituals happened there, that if you went at night, you would see shadowy figures moving between the graves. Standard small-town horror stories that were probably 90% nonsense. But Indiana and I were obsessed with the idea of filming there. We had heard from kids at school that there were actually people who used the cemetery for occult rituals. Someone claimed they had seen candles and symbols painted on the ground near the old mausoleum. Another person said they had heard chanting coming from inside the fence late at night. We figured it was all exaggeration, but even if 10% of it was true, it would make incredible content for our channel. So we planned it out. We would go on a Friday night, hop the fence, explore the cemetery, get some creepy footage, and leave. Simple. We arrived around 11 at night. Indiana drove because he had his license, and I did not. We parked his car about a quarter-mile away on a side road and walked the rest of the way, carrying our cameras and flashlights. The fence was not hard to climb. There were sections where the chain link was bent and torn, probably from years of teenagers doing exactly what we were doing. We squeezed through a gap near the back corner of the property and found ourselves standing in the middle of an overgrown field of graves. The first thing that hit me was the smell. It was not the smell of death or decay, like you might expect. It was more like wet earth and rotting vegetation, mixed with something metallic that I could not quite identify. The second thing I noticed was how quiet it was. No crickets, no birds, no wind rustling the leaves. Just silence. Indiana made some joke about it being the perfect horror movie setting, but I could tell he was nervous too. We both were. There was something about that place that felt fundamentally wrong, like we had crossed into a space where we were not welcome. We started walking toward the main building, filming everything with our cameras. The headstones were in terrible condition. Most of them had been knocked over or were leaning at odd angles. Names and dates were barely legible, worn away by decades of weather and neglect. As we got closer to the caretaker building, I started feeling sick. Not just nervous sick, but genuinely nauseous. My stomach was churning and my head felt light. I told Indiana I needed to stop for a minute, and he suggested I wait by one of the larger monuments while he checked out the building. He wanted to go inside and see if there was anything interesting to film. I did not want to split up, but I also did not want to go into that building. So I agreed. Indiana handed me his jacket in case I got cold and headed toward the structure, which was about 50 yards away. I sat down with my back against a large stone monument, some kind of angel statue with broken wings. I kept my flashlight on and my camera recording, mostly for comfort. The silence was oppressive. I remember thinking that if something did happen, no one would hear me scream. That was when I saw him. A figure emerged from between two rows of headstones about 20 feet to my left. At first, I thought it was Indiana coming back. But then I realized this person was too tall and too old. It was a man, maybe in his 50s, wearing a black hooded cloak that went down to his feet. My entire body went rigid. I wanted to call out to Indiana, but I could not make my voice work. The man had not seen me yet. He was walking slowly, deliberately, toward a specific grave. His back was turned to me, and he seemed completely focused on whatever he was doing. I watched as he stopped at a headstone and knelt down in front of it. He pulled the hood back from his face, and I could see he had short gray hair and a beard. He looked completely ordinary, like someone's dad or uncle. But then he started speaking. The language was not English. It was not Spanish or French or any language I had ever heard before. The words sounded backwards, like someone had recorded a sentence and played it in reverse. The rhythm was all wrong, the syllables harsh and guttural. It made my skin crawl. He reached into his cloak and pulled out a shovel. I have no idea where it came from because it was full-sized, and there was no way it had been hidden under his clothes. But suddenly there it was, and he started digging into the grave. not frantically, but methodically, like this was something he had done many times before. And as he dug, he kept chanting. The words got louder, more intense, echoing in the silence of the cemetery. I realized I was holding my breath, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst. I do not know how long I sat there frozen. It could have been 2 minutes or 10 minutes. Time felt distorted, like I had fallen into a nightmare where the normal rules did not apply. All I could do was watch this man dig and chant and pray to whatever dark thing he was trying to summon. Then I heard footsteps behind me. Indiana. He must have heard the chanting too because he was moving quickly but quietly, crouched low like he was trying to stay hidden. When he reached me, his face was white. His eyes were wide and terrified in a way I had never seen before. He grabbed my arm and whispered one word: "Run." We did not talk about it. We did not stop to grab our equipment. We just ran. We bolted through the cemetery, stumbling over fallen headstones and getting scratched by branches, running toward the fence as fast as we could. Behind us, I heard a sound that I will never forget. A scream. Not a human scream, but something else. Something primal and wrong and full of rage. It echoed through the cemetery, bouncing off the monuments and trees. We did not look back. We squeezed through the gap in the fence and kept running until we reached the car. Indiana fumbled with his keys, his hands shaking so badly he dropped them twice. When we finally got the car started, we drove away faster than we should have on those dark country roads. Neither of us spoke for the first 10 minutes. We just drove, putting as much distance between ourselves and Rosemont Cemetery as possible. When we finally felt safe enough to stop, Indiana pulled over at a gas station on the edge of town. We sat in the parking lot under the fluorescent lights, both of us trying to catch our breath and process what had just happened. That was when Indiana told me what he had seen inside the building. His voice was shaking, and he kept looking over his shoulder like he expected something to appear. He said the main room of the caretaker building had been completely cleared out. The floor was painted with some kind of symbol, a large circle with geometric shapes inside it. He thought it was a pentagram at first, but it was more complex than that, more disturbing. The room was full of dolls, not normal dolls, but handmade ones, crude things with button eyes and stitched mouths. They were arranged in a circle around the symbol, all facing inward like they were watching something. Indiana said he had only been in there for maybe 30 seconds before he heard the chanting start outside. That was when he ran back to find me. But before he left, he saw something else. The other rooms of the building. He would not tell me details. He said I was better off not knowing. But whatever he saw in those rooms changed him. I could see it in his eyes. He was not the same person who had walked into that building 5 minutes earlier. We agreed not to tell anyone. Not our parents, not our friends, nobody. We convinced ourselves that if we just forgot about it and moved on, everything would be fine. We deleted the footage we had recorded. We never talked about our YouTube channel again. For a few weeks, it seemed like we had made the right decision. Life went back to normal. We finished senior year, graduated, made plans for college. But Indiana was different. Quieter, more serious. The goofy, fearless kid I had grown up with was gone, replaced by someone who jumped at shadows and did not sleep well. About a month after the incident, I convinced my mom to drive past Rosemont Cemetery during the day. I told her I was curious about local history, which was a lie. I just needed to see it again in daylight, needed to prove to myself that it was just an old abandoned cemetery and nothing more. When we drove past, I looked through the fence. The caretaker building was still there, but something felt off. My mom slowed down when she saw I was staring, and that was when I noticed it. The building looked different, more deteriorated, like it had aged years in the span of a month. 2 weeks later, I read in the local paper that the town had sent a crew to Rosemont Cemetery to assess it for possible cleanup and restoration. When they went inside the caretaker building, they found it completely empty. Just broken furniture and debris. No symbols on the floor, no dolls, no evidence of any occult activity. The article quoted one of the workers saying it looked like no one had been inside that building in decades. I showed the article to Indiana, and he just looked at me and said, "We both know what we saw." That was 5 years ago. Indiana and I are still friends, but we do not talk about that night. We made an unspoken agreement to bury it along with whatever else happened at Rosemont Cemetery. He went to college across the country, studying engineering of all things. I stayed local and work at a bookstore. We text sometimes, surface-level stuff about jobs and weather and mutual friends. But there is this thing between us now, this shared experience that we both refuse to acknowledge. Because acknowledging it would mean accepting that what we saw was real. I still drive past Rosemont Cemetery sometimes. The fence is still up, the gates still chained. From the road, it looks exactly how an abandoned cemetery should look. Overgrown, forgotten, slowly being reclaimed by nature. But I know better. I know that some places hold darkness that does not fade just because people stop paying attention. I know that there are rituals happening in forgotten corners of the world that we are not meant to witness. And I know that Indiana saw something in that building that was so disturbing, he has never been able to tell me about it. Whatever it was broke something inside him, changed him into someone who no longer believes the world is safe or rational or good. People ask me sometimes if I miss doing urban exploration, making videos, seeking out adventure, and I tell them no, because I learned something important that night at Rosemont Cemetery. Some doors should stay closed. Some places should remain unexplored. And some mysteries are better left unsolved. Because once you see certain things, once you witness the darkness that exists just outside the boundaries of normal life, you can never unsee it. It stays with you. It changes you. And you spend the rest of your life wondering what would have happened if you had just stayed home that night instead of climbing through a hole in a fence looking for something exciting to film. My name is Dalen, and I used to work the night shift at Eternal Rest Cemetery and Funeral Home in Ohio. When I tell people about what happened to me there, most of them assume I am going to talk about ghosts or supernatural encounters. But this story is not about the dead. It is about something far more terrifying. A living person who decided to make me his target. And to this day, I still do not know who he was or what he wanted from me. I got the job when I was 23, fresh out of college with a degree in business administration and drowning in student loan debt. The position was for a night administrative assistant, which basically meant I handled all the after-hours paperwork and phone calls that came in between 6 in the evening and 2 in the morning. The funeral home was part of a larger cemetery complex, one of those places that offered everything from burial plots to cremation services to grief counseling. During the day, the place was busy with families making arrangements, funeral services, burials. But at night, it was just me in the office building, filing death certificates, scheduling burial times, updating records, and answering the occasional phone call from families who needed information outside of business hours. The office building was old, but well maintained, built sometime in the 1920s with thick brick walls and high ceilings. My desk was in the main administrative area, which had large windows overlooking the front parking lot. There were security cameras positioned outside the building at all the entrances, but none inside. The company figured there was nothing valuable enough inside to warrant interior surveillance, just files and computers and office supplies. Looking back, I wish they had installed cameras inside. Maybe then I would have answers. The first few months were completely uneventful. Most nights, I would maybe get 2 or 3 phone calls, usually from people asking about plot availability or requesting copies of burial records for estate purposes. The rest of the time, I would work through my tasks, listen to podcasts, and count down the hours until my shift ended. It was quiet and boring, which was exactly what I needed while I figured out my next career move. I was not planning to make cemetery administration my life. It was just a stepping stone, a way to pay bills while I looked for something better. The calls started in late September. It was a Tuesday night, around 1 in the morning. I was updating a spreadsheet when the office phone rang. I answered with my standard greeting, giving the name of the funeral home and my name. The voice on the other end was male, probably middle-aged, with a calm and polite tone. He asked, "Is anyone else there with you?" It struck me as an odd question, but I figured maybe he was asking if there were funeral directors available for an emergency arrangement. I told him no, that I was the only staff member on duty at night, but that I could take a message or help with basic inquiries. There was a pause, and then he said, "Good." And he hung up. I sat there staring at the phone for a minute, feeling unsettled. Something about the way he said "good" gave me chills. Like my being alone was exactly what he wanted to hear. But I convinced myself I was overreacting. It was probably just some prank call or someone who dialed the wrong number. I made a note of the time and went back to work. Nothing else happened that night. But then he called again. 3 nights later, around midnight. Same voice, same calm tone. This time he asked, "Do you lock the doors?" I told him yes, that all entrances were locked and secured at 6 in the evening. He said, "Are you sure?" and hung up. That was when I started feeling genuinely uncomfortable. This was not a wrong number. This was someone who was specifically calling to ask me questions about my safety and the building security. I wrote down everything I could remember about the calls and decided that if it happened again, I would contact the police. It happened again and again. Over the next 2 weeks, he called 8 more times, always between midnight and 3 in the morning. Each call was short, maybe 15 or 20 seconds. And each time, he asked a different unsettling question. "Can you see the graves from your window? Are you scared of the dead? Do you ever walk through the cemetery at night? What would you do if someone was watching you right now?" I stopped answering the phone unless the caller ID showed a local number or a name I recognized. But even when I did not answer, he would leave voicemails. Just breathing at first, then eventually his voice asking those same disturbing questions. I told my supervisor Talon about it, and he advised me to keep a detailed log of every call and to contact the police if it continued. He also gave me the direct number for cemetery security, though they only patrolled the grounds and did not come into the office building unless requested. Talon said he would look into getting me a panic button installed at my desk, but that it might take a few weeks to process through corporate. In the meantime, I should just stay vigilant and keep the doors locked. The calls continued, but what made it worse was that the caller started using my name. I will never forget the night that happened. I had stopped answering the phone entirely unless I recognized the number. One night, the phone rang, and I let it go to voicemail. I sat there listening to the recording system kick in, and then I heard his voice through the speaker. "I know you are there, Dalen. I can see the light on in your window." My blood went cold. He knew my name, and he was outside the building, watching me. I grabbed my cell phone and called the police immediately. While I waited for them to arrive, I turned off all the lights in the office and moved away from the windows. I kept my eyes on the security monitor that showed the feed from the cameras outside. I could not see anyone in the parking lot or near the entrances, but he had said he could see my light, which meant he had to be somewhere with a direct line of sight to my window. I felt completely exposed, like I was on stage and he was in the audience, watching every move I made. The police arrived within 15 minutes. 2 officers searched the grounds and the perimeter of the building but found no one. They took my statement and listened to the voicemails. One of the officers said they would try to trace the phone number, but he was not optimistic since the caller was likely using a burner phone. They advised me to keep logging everything and to call them immediately if I saw anything suspicious. Then they left, and I was alone again. For the next week, the calls stopped. I thought maybe the police presence had scared him off. I started to relax a little, though I still kept all the lights off except for a small desk lamp and avoided sitting near the windows. Then, on a Friday night around 2 in the morning, someone knocked on the front door. Not the bell. Actual knocking. Deliberate and steady. I looked at the security monitor and saw a man standing at the entrance. He was wearing a baseball cap pulled low over his face, a dark jacket and jeans. He looked directly at the camera and waved. He knew I was watching. I did not move. I did not make a sound. I just watched the monitor and called the police on my cell phone. The dispatcher told me to stay inside and keep the doors locked, that officers were on their way. The man at the door waited for maybe 30 seconds, then started walking around the building toward the back, where there were no cameras. I could hear his footsteps in the gravel outside. He was circling the building, testing the doors, looking for a way in. Then the footsteps stopped. They were right outside the wall where I was sitting, just a few feet away, separated only by brick and a window I could not see out of because I'd closed the blinds. I held my breath. The silence was deafening. And then I heard it. Footsteps running, fast, moving away from the building toward the cemetery. By the time the police arrived 5 minutes later, he was gone. They found shoe prints in the gravel and grass, a clear trail leading from the building into the cemetery, and then past the far fence into the woods beyond. They followed the trail as far as they could, but it eventually disappeared. He was gone. The police investigation that followed was thorough, but ultimately fruitless. They pulled the phone records and confirmed what we already suspected. All the calls came from different burner phones purchased with cash at various stores around the region. They reviewed the security footage and got a partial view of the man at the door. But his face was obscured by the cap, and he never looked directly at the camera for more than a second. They canvassed the neighborhood and the woods behind the cemetery but found nothing. The detective assigned to my case believed the man had been stalking me for weeks, watching the building during my shifts, learning my routine. He probably saw me through the windows during those first few weeks, when I had not been careful about keeping the blinds closed. The worst part was not knowing why. I had no ex-boyfriends or former friends who would do something like this. I did not owe anyone money or have any enemies that I knew of. The detective said sometimes stalkers fixate on people for no rational reason. Maybe he had seen me in public somewhere. Maybe he had called the funeral home during the day and heard my voice. Maybe it was completely random. There was no way to know. I quit 2 weeks later. I could not do it anymore. Every night, I was terrified that he would come back, that he would find a way inside, that the next time I would not be fast enough to call the police. The company was understanding and let me out of my contract without penalty. They hired someone else for the night shift and installed better security measures. But I was done. It has been 3 years now, and he never contacted me again. The police kept the case open for a while, but eventually it went cold. No new leads, no similar incidents reported in the area. He just vanished as mysteriously as he had appeared. I work at a coffee shop now, day shifts only, always surrounded by people. I never work alone anymore. I cannot, because I learned something important during those weeks. Being watched is a special kind of terror. Knowing that someone out there knows your name, knows where you work, knows when you are vulnerable, and you have no idea who they are or what they want. That feeling never completely goes away. This story is not mine. It belongs to my father, Kendricks. But he told it to me so many times when I was growing up that I feel like I lived it myself. My name is Dion, and my family has owned and operated Hillside Cemetery in rural Georgia for 5 generations. We have been burying the dead and maintaining their resting places since 1920. When my great-great-grandfather purchased the land and established the cemetery as a family business. In all those years, through wars and depressions and social upheavals, the cemetery has been a constant, a place of peace and dignity where families can lay their loved ones to rest. But there is one night in our family history that nobody can explain. One event that defies every rational explanation and has been passed down through the generations as a cautionary tale about the mysteries that exist in places where the dead outnumber the living. It happened in the autumn of 1956. My father was 12 years old at the time. The family home was built right on the cemetery property, only about 30 yards from the main office building. This was common practice back then. Cemetery caretakers often lived on site to provide security and be available for emergencies. My grandfather ran the cemetery, assisted by his younger brother Talon. They took pride in their work, maintaining the grounds meticulously, treating every burial with reverence and respect. It was a good life, quiet and predictable. Until that night. My father remembers it was a Saturday evening. He had stayed up late reading comic books in his room on the second floor of the house. His window overlooked the oldest section of the cemetery, the plots that dated back to the 1920s and 30s. There was a lamppost near that section that stayed on all night, providing just enough light to see the first dozen graves. Around midnight, my uncle Talon came upstairs to check on my father before going to bed. He looked out the window and froze. He said he had just seen someone walk behind one of the large oak trees near the first section, a figure moving between the headstones. My grandfather came upstairs to investigate, and the 3 of them stood at the window, looking out over the cemetery. They saw nothing. No movement, no people, no disturbance of any kind. The graves were exactly as they should be, undisturbed, peaceful. My grandfather teased Talon for being jumpy, said it was probably just a deer or a trick of the light. They all went to bed. My father remembers lying in the dark, listening to the old house settle, thinking about what his uncle had seen. But eventually, sleep claimed him. He woke to shouting at 7 in the morning. His grandfather was yelling for everyone to get up and come outside. My father ran downstairs in his pajamas and followed the adults out to the cemetery. What he saw has stayed with him for almost 70 years. 7 graves in the first section had been excavated, not damaged or desecrated in the traditional sense, but disturbed in a way that made no sense whatsoever. The headstones had been removed from their bases and stacked on top of each other like a house of cards. Each stone balanced perfectly on the one below it, creating a tower that stood nearly 6 feet tall. And behind this tower of headstones was something even more impossible. The caskets had been removed from the ground and stacked in an alternating pattern. One laying flat on the ground, the next standing vertical, then flat again, then vertical, continuing upward in this precise pattern. 7 caskets total, creating a structure that reached almost 30 feet into the air. The vertical caskets were balanced perfectly on the horizontal ones below them, defying gravity and logic. My father said it looked like some kind of macabre modern art installation. But this was 1956 in rural Georgia. Nobody was making conceptual art out of grave goods. My grandfather immediately called the police. Within an hour, the cemetery was crawling with officers and investigators. They photographed everything, took measurements, interviewed my family members. The questions they asked all had the same theme. How could this have been done? The logistics were staggering. Each headstone weighed between 100 and 300 pounds. The caskets were even heavier, easily 500 pounds or more, especially the older ones made from heavy wood and metal. To move them, stack them in this precise pattern, and do it all between midnight and 7 in the morning without making any noise was essentially impossible. The police looked for equipment marks, tire tracks from a truck or trailer, evidence of a crane or pulley system, anything that would explain how heavy objects had been moved and stacked. They found nothing. The ground around the excavated graves showed no signs of machinery. No tire tracks, no footprints beyond those of my family members who had discovered the scene that morning. The grass was barely disturbed. It was as if the caskets and headstones had been lifted and arranged by invisible hands. They examined the graves themselves. None of the caskets had been opened. Nothing was stolen. The bodies inside remained undisturbed. This was not grave robbing or desecration in any traditional sense. Whoever or whatever did this had arranged everything with almost surgical precision. The detective in charge said he had never seen anything like it in 30 years of law enforcement. He filed a report, took statements, and promised a thorough investigation. But there was nothing to investigate. No evidence, no witnesses, no leads. The case went nowhere. My grandfather and Uncle Talon spent the next week putting everything back. It took a small crew with proper equipment to disassemble the stack and return each casket to its grave. The headstones were cleaned and reset on their bases. They contacted the families of the deceased to inform them of what had happened, though they struggled to explain it in any coherent way. Most of the families were understanding, though deeply disturbed. A few demanded answers that my grandfather could not provide. Within a month, everything looked normal again. The graves were restored, the grass grew back, and life returned to its quiet routine. But the story did not end there. My father grew up hearing his father and uncle discuss that night in hushed tones. They had theories. My Uncle Talon believed it was vandals, some group of young men who had planned an elaborate prank using equipment they later removed. My grandfather was not convinced. He pointed out that even with equipment, the noise would have been tremendous. The house was only 30 yards away. Someone would have heard something. Chains rattling, engines running, people talking. But there had been nothing. Just silence. As the years went by, the incident became part of family mythology. My father eventually took over running the cemetery from my grandfather, and he experienced his own share of strange occurrences. Nothing as dramatic as the stack, but small, unexplainable things. Once, They found fresh flowers arranged in a perfect circle around a grave, appearing overnight with no explanation. Another time, a single child's shoe was placed on top of a headstone that had been empty the evening before. They reviewed security camera footage, but saw nothing. No people, no animals, just empty frames, and then suddenly an object that had not been there before. My father ran Hillside Cemetery until he retired 10 years ago, when I took over. I am the 5th generation of our family to maintain this place, and I have never experienced anything as dramatic as what happened in 1956. But I believe the story. Not because I'm superstitious or prone to believing in the supernatural, but because I know my father and grandfather were honest men who had no reason to fabricate such a tale. Something happened that night. Something that defied explanation then and continues to defy explanation now. I have researched similar incidents, looking for patterns or historical precedents. There are stories of grave disturbances throughout history, but nothing quite like what happened at Hillside. Most grave robberies are motivated by theft. Body snatchers in the 19th century stole corpses to sell to medical schools. Modern grave desecration is usually vandalism or occult ritual. But the stack was neither. Nothing was stolen, nothing was damaged beyond the act of excavation itself. It was precise, deliberate, and inexplicable. My grandfather took the mystery to his grave. He died in 1998, still convinced that what happened that night was beyond human capability. My uncle Talon passed away 5 years later, equally baffled. My father is 81 now, and sometimes when I visit him, he will bring up that morning. The image of those stacked caskets reaching toward the sky, defying gravity and reason. He says it taught him that cemeteries are old places, and old places have secrets. Some things happen that we are not meant to understand. I think about that a lot now that I run Hillside. Every evening when I lock the gates and walk back to my office, I look out over the graves and wonder what really happened in 1956. Was it human? Was it something else? The rational part of my mind wants to believe there is an explanation, some detail that was missed or misremembered. But the part of me that has spent my entire life around the dead, the part that has seen flowers appear from nowhere and heard footsteps in empty buildings, that part knows better. Some places hold power that exists outside our understanding. Cemeteries are thresholds, places where the living and the dead exist in close proximity. And sometimes, just sometimes, the boundary between those worlds becomes thin enough that impossible things can happen. I cannot prove what occurred at Hillside Cemetery in 1956, but I can tell you that my family does not lie, and we do not exaggerate. What happened that night was real, and it remains, to this day, one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in our family history. My name is Jalin, and I am a professional photographer specializing in Gothic and moody aesthetics. My work focuses on abandoned places, historic architecture, and yes, cemeteries. I know some people find it morbid, but I have always seen beauty in decay, in the way nature reclaims human structures, in the artistry of Victorian mourning culture. Cemetery photography has become incredibly popular on social media over the past few years, and I built a successful portfolio doing exactly that kind of work. But 3 years ago, I photographed something I was never meant to capture. And what happened afterward has completely changed the way I think about my work and what exists beyond the lens of a camera. It was late October, perfect weather for outdoor photography. I had gotten permission from the director of Oakwood Cemetery. a beautiful historic burial ground in upstate New York that dated back to the mid-1800s. The place was a photographer's dream. Ornate mausoleums with stained glass windows, marble angel statues in various states of weathering, massive oak trees with branches that created natural frames, and row after row of Victorian-era headstones with elaborate engravings. I brought my friend Kendricks along as an assistant to help carry equipment and hold reflectors when needed. We arrived around 4 in the afternoon to take advantage of golden hour lighting. The first hour of shooting went perfectly. We focused on the newer sections of the cemetery, capturing modern headstones with late afternoon sun filtering through autumn leaves. Then we moved deeper into the historic section, where the graves dated back to the 1860s and 70s. This was where the real architectural beauty lived. Family plots with wrought iron fencing, mausoleums that looked like miniature Greek temples, statues of weeping angels and praying saints. I took hundreds of photos, adjusting angles and exposure settings, completely absorbed in the work. There was one section that stood out. It was tucked away in the far corner of the cemetery, partially shaded by a cluster of ancient maple trees. The moment we walked into that area, the temperature dropped noticeably. Kendricks commented on it immediately, joking that we had found the spooky section. But he was not entirely joking. There was something about the atmosphere there that felt different, heavier. The air was still, no birds singing, no insects buzzing, just silence. Despite the cold and the odd feeling, the light was perfect, soft and diffused, creating this ethereal quality that I knew would look incredible in photos. I spent about 30 minutes photographing that section, focusing particularly on one angel statue. She was magnificent, nearly 6 feet tall, carved from white marble that had turned gray with age, caught in a pose of eternal mourning with her face buried in her hands and her wings folded around her body. I must have taken 50 photos of that statue alone, circling it from every angle, playing with depth of field and composition. Kendricks stood back, watching me work, occasionally mentioning that he felt uncomfortable in that area. I brushed off his concerns. I was too focused on getting the shots I wanted. We finished as the sun was setting and packed up our equipment. The drive home was uneventful, and I remember feeling satisfied with the day's work. I could not wait to upload the photos and start editing. The next morning, I transferred all the images to my computer and began the editing process. That was when I noticed something strange. Every single photo I had taken in that cold section, the area with the angel statue, had the same issue. There was a figure in the background of each shot. At first, I thought it was Kendricks. Maybe he had walked into frame without realizing it. But when I looked closer, I realized this was not Kendricks. The figure was blurry and indistinct, like a shadow or a smudge on the lens. Except it was not a smudge because it appeared in different positions in each photo. In one image, the figure was far in the background between 2 headstones. In the next image, taken seconds later from a slightly different angle, the figure had moved. It was closer, standing near a different grave. I went through the entire series chronologically, watching the figure gradually move closer to where I had been standing. I called Kendricks and asked if he remembered seeing anyone else in the cemetery that day. He said no. We had been completely alone. The cemetery had closed to visitors at 5, and by the time we were shooting that section, it was well past closing. The gates were locked. There was no way someone could have been walking around in the background without us noticing. But there she was. And I say she because in some of the closer images, I could make out details. A long dress, old-fashioned, the kind women wore in the late 1800s. Dark hair pulled back. But her face was always obscured, either turned away from the camera or somehow blurred beyond recognition. The most disturbing photo was the one I had taken of the angel statue from directly in front. I had framed it so the statue filled most of the frame, with just a bit of background visible. In that photo, the figure was no longer in the background. She was standing directly behind the statue, barely visible between the angel's folded wings, and she was facing the camera. I zoomed in as much as the resolution would allow, trying to see her face clearly. But the more I enhanced the image, the more distorted it became. Her features seemed to shift and blur, refusing to come into focus. I am not someone who believes in ghosts or the paranormal. My entire career is built on capturing reality, on documenting what exists in the physical world. But I could not explain these images. I checked my equipment thoroughly. No smudges on the lens, no malfunctions with the camera sensor, no double exposures or digital artifacts. The figure was there, in the photos, plain as day. So I did what any rational person would do. I started researching the cemetery. Oakwood Cemetery has detailed records going back to its founding in 1864. I spent hours going through their online archives, searching for information about the section where I had photographed the angel statue. I found the plot. It belonged to a woman named Eleanor Hartwell, buried in 1897 at the age of 23. The cause of death listed was childbirth complications. Next to her grave, barely visible in my photographs because the headstone was so small and weathered, was another burial. An infant, no name recorded, just baby Hartwell, with the same death date as Eleanor. I went back through my photos with this new information and examined them carefully. In several images, you could see the base of the angel statue where Eleanor's name was carved. In person, the name had been completely weathered away, unreadable. But in my photographs, with the specific lighting and contrast, the name was visible, Eleanor Hartwell. And in one photo where I had zoomed in on the angel's hands, you could see something I had not noticed when I took the picture. The small grave marker for the baby, half buried in fallen leaves. It was right there, just a foot away from Eleanor's headstone. I made a decision that some people might think was crazy. I posted the photos to my Instagram account. I did not sensationalize them or make wild claims about ghosts. I simply posted them with a caption explaining that I had photographed Oakwood Cemetery and noticed an interesting anomaly in the images. I included the historical information about Eleanor Hartwell and her baby. I wanted to be respectful, to frame it as a curiosity rather than a ghost story. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours, dozens of people commented saying they had seen the same figure. Other photographers who had shot at Oakwood over the years went back through their old photos and found her there, in the background, always in that same section. Some of the images people sent me were from 5 or 6 years ago. One person had photographed the cemetery in 2015 and found the figure in their pictures, though they had not noticed it at the time. Everyone who saw her had been photographing the angel statue or the immediate area around it. Then someone sent me a message that changed everything. They said they had researched Eleanor Hartwell after seeing my post. According to local historical records, Eleanor's baby had been buried without a proper marker because the family could not afford one. Cemetery records listed the infant's location, but there was never a headstone. The baby had essentially been forgotten, buried in an unmarked grave next to a mother who died, bringing it into the world. The person who messaged me had a theory. Eleanor's spirit appeared to photographers because she wanted someone to remember her child, someone to acknowledge that her baby existed. I went back to Oakwood Cemetery 3 days later. I brought flowers, white roses, and a small stuffed lamb. I placed them on Eleanor's grave and on the spot where the records indicated her baby was buried. I did not bring my camera this time. I just stood there for a while, speaking quietly, telling Eleanor that I saw her and her child, that I would make sure their story was remembered. Kendricks was with me again, and he said later that the atmosphere in that section felt different, lighter somehow, less oppressive. I took one final photo that day, just a single shot of the angel statue with the flowers at its base. When I looked at it later, the figure appeared one last time. But this time, she was not alone. There was a second, smaller shape next to her, barely visible, a bundle like an infant wrapped in cloth. And for the first time in any of the photographs, Eleanor's face was clear. She was smiling. I have gone back to Oakwood several times since then. I always bring flowers for Eleanor and her baby. And I have never seen the figure in any photographs taken after that day. Neither has anyone else who has photographed that section since. The comments and messages stopped. Other photographers report that the area feels normal now, just another beautiful historic section of the cemetery. I choose to believe that Eleanor was waiting all those years for someone to acknowledge her child, to recognize that her baby existed and mattered. And somehow, through photography, through light and shadow and digital sensors, she found a way to make herself seen.